Shalom Aleichem Rabbi Sai. This is Yehud 11, and the program is 11 at 11, heard each and every Thursday evening, 11 o'clock on 620 AM radio. And all I can say is, Baruch Shechianu v'kimanu v'kiyanu l'zman hazeh. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I'm a pretty old puppy. And Baruch Hashem, for the first time, I'm actually videoing my own program, in particular for the B'nai Torah Olam in Lakewood, but in Yirtzeh Hashem, for people worldwide, that they should be able to access this program of Torah and Hashkafa, in which I impart the Derech HaChaim that I imbibed and integrated into my life these past 4 decades, from Meron Rabban and Gedolei Yisrael, Rav Avigdor Miller, the Kasher Rav, the Debetzin Rav, the Shem Metzena Balacha, Rav Aaron Leitner, Rav Shmuel Feivelson, Rav Teitz, Rav Ovadya Yosef, and Yibad L'chaim Tov Maruchim, to a certain small extent, Rav Sterbuch, the late great Rav Shmuel Orbach, the Sklener Rebbe, Zolazang Zuten Stark, and other Gedolei Yisrael. This week, we're going to feature this week we're going to feature a very provocative program, and I want to give you the coming attractions of this hour. We're going to speak about adultery in Lakewood. Adultery in Lakewood. We're going to have part 4 of the fake news world champion of Haredi fake news, David Lichtenstein, and why what he did on Headlines Radio is so dangerous, with some new insights, including David Lichtenstein's disparagement of Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Kodesh Levracha. In addition, we're going to discuss Rabbi Ovadya Yosef's openly homosexual grandson and his quote-unquote chasana. If that's not enough for you this evening, we're going to discuss the Satmar faction that attacked in the most grub, disgusting way Rav Moshe Sterbuch, Zolazang Zuten Stark. We're going to discuss insights into the recent Supreme Court decision about the evangelical baker who wouldn't bake a cake for a homosexual couple. And we're going to discuss the attack on Bris Milah that's taking place in Europe, and most particularly in Denmark. And then hopefully HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us enough time that we can also have inspiring Chiddushei Divrei Torah, Chiddushei Torah towards the end of the program. And once again, I'm your humble host, Yehud 11, inviting each and every one of you to become a shutef in this work. Not chas v'shalom that I would ask you to help by giving me some money to help fund this program, which is a non-for-profit endeavor in which I deal with out of my own paltry pocket, many times on credit cards, but become a partner in this program in a non-expensive way, just by letting friends and people know that this program exists and that we can spread the word and have more of an impact. Let us begin with adultery in Lakewood. Today, in Ikvus of the Mashiach, the Yetzer Hara is tremendously strong. And people contend with problems, challenges that we did not have in former years to anywhere near this extent. When we were in the small shtetlich in Europe, etc., there was always a Yetzer Hara, but it wasn't as pronounced. It wasn't as manifold. It wasn't in such a broad way as what we're confronted with today. And as I get older, I tend to be more understanding, if you will, of the fact that people have Yetzer Haras. Nevertheless, unlike what David Lichtenstein was doing in his Headlines program interview with me around in mid-May, where he was basically making almost excuses, leaning over backwards in his V'yahavta Re'acha Kamocha, to the person based on his homosexuality, and I'm going to discuss how one should react to a homosexual, but instead we have to draw the line and say that while we might have rachmanis on a person who gave into his taivas, we certainly can't allow that person to be in a leadership situation. There are tens and tens of askonim in Lakewood, and I specifically do not want to hurt or harm any particular mishpacha of a particular avarian. However, I think you would agree with me that we do not want a shliach tzibur, we do not want a person as a figure of some authority and leadership role, whether it would be on a zoning board or a committee or an educational institution or whatever it might be, who is an avarian, who is over in Leisinov. Now it's my impression that the powers that be in Lakewood at the very top are familiar with what I'm talking about. And perhaps for whatever reasons they justify that they therefore have fully control over the person or whatever it is, I want to issue a shout out to the vaunted CEO of Lakewood, Reb Aaron Kotler, and to tell him that people are talking, people are complaining that a person who is over a chumriistic avera that caused such terrible repercussions in ruchnius and in menschlichkeit, it is not right that such a person should continue to be an asken of any sort. Yilbish chayre v'yelech l'makamacha, let him do tshuva. I hope he did do tshuva, whatever. So v'hamevin yovin, we don't want to go any further with this. Tein l'chochem v'yechkam oid. Let Reb Aaron Kotler present to the Rosh Yeshivas what the facts are, and perhaps it's time to clean house when it comes to this particular situation. Number two, Rabbi Ovadya Yosef has a grandson by the name of Cohen, who it seems was in the Israeli media because not only did he come out as an open Mishkav Zochernik, but he was actually part of some kind of a commitment ceremony or a marriage ceremony or whatever it is. I want to ask a question. Why is it that a person who is a Gadol Hadar, who impacted on millions of Yidden, who had perhaps the largest levaya in history, or certainly maybe in the last few thousand years, or last 1,000 years, nearly 1 million people came to his levaya, which definitely sends a powerful message of how great he was and the effect he had on Yiddishkeit, on the Sephardic community in particular, and Yiddishkeit in general. We were all inspired by him. Why should such a person, in the most immediate sense, shortly after his passing, have such a blight, such a chilul Hashem, such an embarrassment? We don't know why, but are we allowed to propose a supposition? Perhaps. I think we are. And I think that Rabbi Ovadya Yosef, who I had a personal shaychus with some 10 years ago or so in Eretz Yisrael, when I was there the same year as the Lebanon incursion, and I was there almost from Isru Chag Pesach. I came home Motzi Lag Ba'omer and returned Isru Chag Shavuos to Eretz Yisrael, and I was there until Chodesh Elul. And I was at that point successful in preventing a Mishkav Zacha parade from being in the streets of Yerushalayim. That was the one and only year, and I was Zocha to be a catalyst for this. At that time, I had a shaykhus with Rabbi Ovadya Yosef. Eli Yishai brought me into Rabbi Ovadya Yosef. He told Rabbi Ovadya Yosef, me and my partner, Rabbi Ephraim Holzberg from Eretz Yisrael, were doing more than anybody else to fight the Mitzad Hagaiva. And he might have even said we should be embarrassed from what this American is doing. He might have said something like that. Rav Ovadya, who was famous, when he liked somebody, he would patch him on the face. He gave me so many patches that if these patches are what I think they are, I hope I'll be in Gan Eden. And Rav Ovadya was quite positive. However, in the future, when I attempted to reach out to him, he was surrounded by politicians, secretaries, and actual Knesset members that were not all as gung-ho, as strong as he was on the Mishkav Zachar thing. And I think I can say that just like Degel HaTorah and Agudas Yisrael have basically had to have their hands twisted that year when I twisted their hands, because the Eloy Rav insisted that they have a meeting with me. But again, I have a lot of complaints, not only on what happens here with the Askanim, but it's the same Chazarah in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, the point that I'm making is, could it be that because Rav Ovadya's Shas organization has not prioritized in a significant and ongoing way the struggle against all of the associated evils of the Mishkav Zachar, transgendered parades and legislation, etc., that because of that, there's a midah keneged midah that this Gadol B'Yisrael has to have the embarrassment of having a grandson to do such things. This does bespeak to the intergenerational continuity of Klal Yisrael. Just like the Heshiv Leiv Oveis al Bonim v'Leiv Bonim al Avoisam, in a similar matter, when somebody does something which is slightly askew, kefi madrei gosoi, in future generations, this can yield sometimes mega or catastrophic Chilul Hashems, as we see in this particular case. So we have to be so careful to do the right thing and to do as much as possible, so that leman lo nigal lerik v'lo neiled lebahala, we should v'lo nevesh nikolim li'olam voed. I want to just comment briefly on the Satmar, the Satmar gathering, the anti-Tzioni gathering in Nassau County, I think it was. And I'm not getting involved in the politics of Derain, but it's absolutely outrageous and disgusting. You know, it's sickening when you see, let's say, the Yankees are playing against the Dodgers or something like that. And there are diehard Yankee fans and there are diehard Dodger fans, and they'll argue vociferously, and they can actually come to blows, to fisticuffs, to fighting. We look at this, we say, isn't this asinine? Isn't this ridiculous? How much more so is the Chil Hashem when there are splits in Hasidic groups, or for that matter, when it happened once in a while in Ponevezh. And there's this kind of physical fighting, or this chazarai, or this disparagement on a terrible level. It reflects so badly on that particular group of Yidden, and by extension, it's an embarrassment to all of us Shomrei Torah and Mitzvahs. Years ago, when one Hasidic Satmar faction brought in dogs into the main Satmar-based medrash on Hoshana Rabbah or Simchas Torah, whenever it was, this was an outrageous busha and chalima. Similarly, if one group of Satmar decides to make a kinus, and because the other one does it, so this group does, the other group does the exact opposite, it becomes absolutely treif just because one does it. It shows such a disgusting babyish immaturity. And whoever's foolish enough to believe that this is really truly based on hashkafa, well, this is what Rabbeinu Yoel Misatma wanted, I can sell that person to Brooklyn Bridge. I'm outraged that they take a person of the stature of a Moshe Sterbuch, and the other side goes and issues papers that say Moshe Sterbuch Shin Reish Yud, which is the equivalent of Yamach Shemoy or whatever it is. It's just Shem Rishon Yirkav, whatever it is, disgusting, feh. And when there's plausible deniability, I would call upon the very leadership, the Rebbe of that faction, to stand up and publicly, totally disassociate himself from this kind of disgusting misbehavior, and to call upon his Hasidim to say, if I find out who does this, who puts this out, who does these kinds of maneuverable things, I'm going to throw him out of the community. It's enough. We see this in various different communities, but nowhere do we see it, perhaps, as much as internecine fighting in Satmar, and it's really sickening and disgusting. It's gone on long enough, and Pesach is gone, Pesach Sheni is long since gone, but it's time for us once again to sing, to cry out in pain, Dayenu. I ask you once again, Murder Rabbi Site, to be a shutef in passing on the fact to your friends, neighbors, relatives, enemies, that the radio program exists, and that those in the New Jersey listening range should tune in every Thursday night at 11, 6:20 a.m. radio for 11 at 11, and you can see this and hear this on the you can see and hear this on the on the video, which hopefully will be put up in Hefgewelt and maybe can be seen on other sites as well. So pass the word on, please. Also, for those who might be interested in the Shiurim of the Divrei Torah, you can hear that on Kol Halashon 718-906-6400. And you would go to 1 for English, 3 for the subcategory I'm in, and 33 for my channel. And there are 81 Shiurim on the entire gamut of the Jewish calendar. I want to deal with part 4 of David Lichtenstein's fake news headlines, in which he sliced and diced my comments, and he still doesn't have the guts. He's chicken. He's afraid to play the 1 hour and 15-minute total debate that I had with him, which would edify the listeners and give them the full gamut, the full panacea, the full perspective of our debate in all its hashkafic ramifications, instead of slicing and dicing me. Because he was over on Loyachel Diburo, he pledged, so to speak, he gave his word that he was going to do this, and then his feeble baby excuse for not doing it was, I criticized him because he held a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton and wasted over $200,000 of Yiddish geld on chanfening the Rishas Hillary. Or I compared him because of his liberal statements, particularly about how many times it says in the Torah Toyeva, and why I'm only concerned with the Toyeva of homosexuality and not Gaiva and Gezela. I said, boy, you're just like Shmuley Batayach. This was so insulting to his fragile ego that was his excuse that he gave to his producer to tell me why he's not playing over the program. Shame on you, David Lichtenstein. But I must say, for the 4th week running, because I'm trying to get the word out as much as possible, that people should understand that David Lichtenstein, who I like personally, is a friend of the family for over 50 years, but mechuten, geschäft. I can't let my personal fondness of him or my appreciation of his Mailos Toivos get in the way of the halach, of the hashkafic blotter, the hashkafic swamp, mire, muck that he's involved in certain cases. And therefore, I want to continue with part 4, which hopefully, I can't promise, will be the final segment, the final discussion of David Lichtenstein and why what he's doing is more dangerous than what the secular media does, why it's more dangerous than what the secular politicians do, and even why it's more dangerous than many of the Askanim who represent Bobav and Satmar, etc., because he has a halachic type program of headlines, and he's taka a yadin. He has a crew of people that prepare him, that help him, but he's a big ben Torah. He's a Talmud Chacham, and he knows how to learn up a sugya far better than me. I'm not contending with him in that, but I'm saying that when he does something wrong, he's like the Marines. He's held to a much higher standard, and it's much more dangerous in terms of the sewage that seeps in to Klal Yisrael, and therefore, caveat emptor, religious buyer beware of what David Lichtenstein is doing at different points in headline radio. So let's go to the tape.
Say this person is an oinus, and I don't know if I could live a life of celibacy. Or would you start quoting my murm from Rabbi Ovadya Yosef? And your answer is that Ben Adam Lamakim starts with Ben Adam Chavere, starts with Ben Adam Lamakim. So Kanoim Paikim Bay, because that's Ben Adam Lamakim. Is that what you're saying?
Even though Kanoim Paikim Bay is not applicable to Ganson, but you know that. But the point is, I was on the Ali Combs radio program, and a guy called me up, and I said, but Rabbi, for the grace of God, what if I had desires for underage girls? What if I had desire for HSCs? What if I had the challenge? I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm telling you, you would let excuse of a lot of things. I'm not a lawyer. I'm very transparent. I'm not prevaricating. I'm telling you, I do not hate anybody who goes through the typhus and what do you call it, succumbs. What I do absolutely loathe is when you want to march about it, you want to elevate it, you want to...
We agree on that. We agree. I agree with you.
Therefore, I am sympathetic to the individual.
So Rabbi Yehuda, so then in closing, would it be fair to say, okay, let's tell me then if I hear that we would agree, right, that first of all, somebody who is in that 1 or 2%, whatever the number may be, who is, on the spectrum where he really has no attraction, right? So it's not a choice. So first of all, he's an oinus. He didn't want to be created that way. He would love to be created normal. If he's a shaymerit, you call him Yosef, you call him a tzaddik. I certainly agree with that. If he's nichshel, right, you say you had empathy for him. And you say, if I were born that way, who knows if I could live a celibate life? And your main opposition is to the people who so quote unquote gay pride and turn it into a something to be proud of. And you say it's nothing more to be proud of than any legislation. It's nothing more to be proud of than any other. It's an unfortunate. We don't understand why Kaviyachal does this, but to transgender, to make this a cause and a mission and a cause celebrate is something that you're opposed to. Is that what you're saying?
No, right, and to push it in this.
And I think Rabbi Levin at the end, I think we agree on 90%.
No.
The only thing I don't agree is labeling why terrible things happen to people. I don't think that's beyond any news. Okay, Yehuda, it's wonderful talking to you, and certainly you should continue. Those who are like lahashmid or laharig and they're screaming pro. It's terrible. It's mamish hepachatayr, and on that area, certainly we agree. So thank you very much for your time.
All the best.
Okay, that concludes with the discussion with David Lichtenstein. But of course, he was cutting me and slicing me and dicing me, and I profoundly disagree with him. Listen carefully to the amaratzis, the willful distortion and ignorance, or his inability to understand Pashat Pshat. He quoted a Tosfos, and he uses the word now without quoting Tosfos, but with Rabbi Rappaport, he used the Tosfos. He quoted the Tosfos that says it's an oinus, that homosexual activity is an oinus. The Tosfos wasn't talking that we give a free ticket to the Avarian who transgresses in homosexual activity, that he's considered an oinus, because oinus rachmana patre. So then he's potter. So a person can never be chayav for homosexuality because he's an oinus. If this is the implication of what David Lichtenstein is saying, then he's worse than the idiot. He's falsifying the Torah. Tosfos is simply saying that there's a concept called a mumar lahachis, or a mumar l'teyavim. And Tosfos, in terms of mumarkite, calls the person an oines, because Tosfos comprehends the severity of this taiva once they're involved in it, whatever. For instance, a young man can lead a perfectly happy heterosexual life. However, if as a child or a teenager he is molested, there's a 30% chance that he himself will involve himself and engage in a homosexual lifestyle, and he will not be interested in having a normative heterosexual lifestyle. The case might be made, perhaps, that this guy, this Lubavitcher Levin, this Oisvarf, who is a political activist who helped found Jewish queer youth and who I spoke to in the past, and who was responsible in a lawsuit for stopping the organization of Arthur Goldberg in New Jersey called Jonah, which would help people to leave the homosexual lifestyle and come to a heterosexual because of a lifestyle. Because of this guy's suit, Levin, other people do not have the opportunity for possibly being rehabilitated. So he's an Oisvarf Levin, and he's a political advocate of the worst kinds, this Lubavitcher, former Lubavitcher Levin. So he himself, if he wouldn't have been molested by his cousin in his early teenage years or prepubescent years, he might have actually been able to live a normal, happy, heterosexual life. So when David Lichtenstein uses the word oinus and throws it around and elasticizes it, it's either he has an agenda and he's misinterpreting a Tosfos because it fits his agenda, or he's speaking Amaratzis, but whatever it is, it's dangerous for somebody who has a radio program where he puts on leading Rabbanim, and we think, Taka, that when he's saying something, it's authoritative. Now, let me tell you how Lichtenstein disparaged the late, great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He did it in two ways. At one point, in his introduction to Rabbi Rappaport, I think, he references a tshuva in which Rabbi Moshe speaks about doing tshuva on Mishkav Zachor or something, and Rabbi Moshe seems to be making the statement that there's not a person who's born intrinsically homosexual, and Lichtenstein blithely dismisses this and says, science, now we know, kach statistics and everything else. It's very scary to talk so blithely like that and to dismiss Reb Moshe. And Reb Moshe didn't live 1,000 years ago. You know, Reb Moshe lived a few years ago. When he was nifter, David Lichtenstein must have been in the area of 20-something years old, maybe a quarter of a century old. So therefore, to just dismiss what Reb Moshe said is disrespectful and inappropriate. And if you're going to argue with his contention, Reb Moshe's contention, you do it with years hakavod. But how do we understand this? The Ramban that I've quoted before, maybe it's in Hazinu, seems to say a similar thing to what Reb Moshe said, except 1,000 years or so earlier. In other words, the inyan of homosexuality is when people or a person gets so jaded with his heterosexual activities that he looks for new thrills and he gets to homosexuality. Now, that might be in a macro way, in an overarching way. That might be what's happening to society. And so we might find an increase in homosexuality to the extent that it's kimat, like the person is born with this. But in other words, I'm not saying I know all the answers. Shmuel Kamenetsky and some 200 rabbis, etc., signed that a person should try to do reparative therapy. And that's certainly, I think Moshe would agree with that, and all the Gedolim of yesteryear would agree that a person should try any therapies to cure himself if possible. Now, so I believe it's disparaging just to dismiss Rav Moshe, because the percentage of homosexual activists or people who are now affiliating with homosexuality has absolutely mathematically, quantitatively increased in the last few decades. And I have numerous Meyer McComas and statistics. Just like last week I explained that there have been studies that have shown there's a tremendous increase in children and adults asking for transgender operations to change their quote-unquote gender because it's becoming a popular thing. It's the same thing with this deviance of Mishkav Zohar, that there's absolutely an increase. When you have TV programs and you have sports figures that announce their predilections and their changes and everything else, all of this cumulatively has an impact. So we have to understand that sexual identity is extremely fluid, and there are a certain amount of the people in the homosexual community who have a predilection, but they are not exclusively homosexual. And there are others, even if they're born, if they discover a gene, it doesn't faze me. But I want to say this. There's no question that in my public persona, because I have received a job assignment from the likes of Rabbi Ovadya Yosef, the Rebbetziner of the Kasher of L'mayla B'Kodesh, to fight against the political homosexual Mishkav Zohar agenda and its legislation and its acceptance in the common culture. Because of that, it would appear to most people, to many people, that I'm insensitive and hateful, or not appreciating the tremendous struggle in Taivas, and how that certainly Erliche Yidden who suffer with this malady would give anything to be able to be happily heterosexual and not have to go through this daily Gehenna. So I want to state clearly, when David Lichtenstein said in his opening remarks to me, how would you deal? I met a guy who came back from Eretz Yisrael and he said, I'm of Shidduch age, but I have no interest in the girl, and what should I do, and this and that. Why he came to David Lichtenstein, I don't exactly know. What was David Lichtenstein supposed to do for him? What can I do for a person? But I would tell you, the way Lichtenstein was speaking to him and the way I would speak to him, this is the way I would speak to him, and this is the way, in the not so distant past, I spoke to a tremendous tzaddik, a person who feels he is very much a homosexual and desires people of the same gender, and yet he's married, and I believe he's fulfilled the obligation of having children, and he struggles mightily. He's a Ben Torah, and he goes through Gehenna every day, and at certain points he's sad and he's depressed, and he soldiers on. I told this person, and I believe this, Be'emunah Shalema, Schorcha harbe ma'od, for every time he overcomes his taiva, and the fact that he's for sure 20-something, maybe even 30-something, and hasn't acted out, he's a tzaddik yisoid olam. And I explained to him, the way I understand this is Gilgulim, that we're all here after various transmigrations, and we have certain things to be masaking. And obviously that's why it's not obvious to some people. To me, it's fairly obvious that the reason certain people have certain challenges in their lives is because they have to rectify a particular area. So that's why he has it. And when he succeeds in his struggle, partially, what he's doing is he is not only helping himself. I believe that because of achva and reus and arvus, and we're all one big klal yisrael, one chativa achas. So what he does helps tens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Yidden who are facing Yetzer Haras and Taivas, perhaps to overcome. He brings life, he brings anti-death, he brings healing. In other words, this level of avodah kosher that he has, Milchamas Hashem Ba'amalek Midar Dar, like the Rebbetziner wrote, So every time he's menatzeach, he's victorious. Now, how many homosexuals hear this with all the do-gooders? Even Rabbi Rappaport, did they say this message? Did they give this message that you are from the unique percentile, the small, tiny minority of a minority of Klal Yisrael that has been chosen with the hardest nisyonis? But if we believe and subscribe to Chazal that Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bo B'Trunya Rabbi Yosef, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not give us a mountain of a nisyon that we cannot climb. It could be much harder, but we can somehow climb it. If we believe this and we subscribe to this, then we understand that those who are challenged by cancer, those who are challenged by other illnesses, those that are challenged financially, and a million times more those who are challenged sexually, that scharam harbe ma'oid, and that they're being mizaka, all of us in Klal Yisrael, and we have to appreciate and respect what they're doing. And at the same time, when they slip up, we have to feel bad for them. I feel bad for their slippage. But if you're going to try to advocate it or lead or anything like that, you have no place advocating or leading or trying to diminish Klal Yisrael's natural abhorrence to this misbehavior. And by the way, David Lichtenstein, standing on your pedestal of moral superiority, at one point in our interview, I don't know if they played this part or not, I had to insist to you that I'm not a hater because you're just throwing the word hate like this. Well, let me tell you something. I don't hate. And I have said publicly on many occasions, therefore the grace of God go I. I think I have a more profound understanding of what they're suffering, etc., than David Lichtenstein or many other people, because I've spent a lot of time speaking about it and thinking about it. But the point is, speaking of hate, I quoted to you the Chavetz Chaim in Sharat Zion in the very first siman in Shulchan Aruch, where he says Tachlis Sinasi Nasi. He talks about hate. He quotes David HaMelech as saying to hate. And then there's the pasuk Yitel Mahavi Hashem Sinura. They hate. And guess what, David, Moshe Feinstein is also disparaged by you because he's not as enlightened as you, because Moshe is a hater. You know why? Because in the letter that Yehuda Levin was the catalyst in getting for Moshe Feinstein, he writes, L'malis Sa'ulim Kol Yemei hearings, to fill the city council hall in the city hall to protest against pro-homosexual legislation, Lahares Goli, to show manifestly L'chol Amim, to all people of the world, Sha'am Hashem Soine Teyeva, we hate, we abhor, we loathe. So what do you say to Rav Moshe David? And then finally, when you told me an Amaratzis, I can't talk now. When you talk, please go ahead. I can't talk now. Please, I can't be disturbed now. I'm on a radio program. I can't be disturbed. Leave the house if you're going to disturb me. Now, the fact of the matter is that I'm sorry for that interruption. The fact of the matter is that David Lichtenstein tried to say that Reb Moshe would be allowed or in favor even of voting or supporting or financing low-life politicians because everybody knows that the Jews are against homosexuality, just like the Reb Moshe holds you can honor a doctor because everybody knows that the doctor is, even if he's a Chol Shabbos, that we don't embrace Chol Shabbos. And I explained in the past radio programs how this is ridiculous. He's comparing apples and oranges because the Gentiles understand that Tinik Shenishba, that not every Jew has to be a Sabbath observer, but the morality, there are billions, certainly hundreds of millions of Christians and Muslims and non-Jews that understand that homosexuality is terribly wrong, and they won't understand how we can honor politicians that are anathematic, that are anathema, antithetical to everything we stand for. So that's three different cases of disparagement for David Lichtenstein of the Shitas of Moshe Feinstein. Shame on you, Rav David Lichtenstein. Shame on you. By the way, when we compare David Lichtenstein to a modern Orthodox person like Norman Lamb, who should we listen to more? Norman Lamb or David Lichtenstein? So listen to this. I want to say again, the Jewish press is doing unbelievable work. Unbelievable work. The Jewish press, under its new editorial leadership of Elliot Resnick, is publishing article after article that's a grand slam home run. And therefore, I'm telling you, I'm not embarrassed to say it behooves us that people who have the internet and etc., they have whatever it is, they can go to see these articles on the internet site, the Jewish press, they definitely should. And I don't think it's terrible that they should get subscriptions either, because Kedai to see these articles, the weekly article about what's happening in the reports from the culture wars is absolutely necessary. And the various moral articles each and every week without failure is Mamish Kiddush Hashem, and Halavai that Yated and Hamadiyah, the right-wing Haredi vehicles should cover this stuff like the Jewish press does. Here's an article that appears on this week's Friday, June the 8th Jewish Press on page 8. It's entitled Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, a Moral Hawk. And this is what in Judaism and the modern attitude towards homosexuality in 1974, this is what Norman Lamb writes. Under no circumstances can Judaism suffer homosexuality to become respectable. Were society to give its open or even tacit approval to homosexuality, it would invite more aggressiveness on the part of adult pederasts towards young people. Indeed, in the currently permissive atmosphere, the Jewish view would summon us to the semantic courage of referring to homosexuality not as a deviance with the implication of moral neutrality and non-judgmental idiosyncrasy, but as perversion. You hear Norman Lamb is saying it's not enough to call it deviant, you have to call it perversion. Listen to this, the modern Orthodox head of YU, what he was saying. A less clinical and more old-fashioned word, perhaps, but one that is more in keeping with the biblical to'eva. So David Lichtenstein was asking questions about the use of to'eva, and here you have a person that I'm sure Lichtenstein would have great respect for, and he explains to'eva as perversion, not just deviance. Here's another quote from Dr. Norman Lamb. In The Future of Creativity in Jewish Law and Thought, 1992 lecture, he says, I do not accept as examples of halachic creativity such spurious heterim as driving to shul on Shabbat, patrilinealism, alternative sexual lifestyles, all of which incidentally have been paraded before the public as halachically justified as an example of courageous halachic creativity. Such is the latest grotesque creative adaptation of halacha by unrepentant and publicly assertive homosexual rabbis or pulpit pederasts, he calls them, pulpit pederasts. Listen to this, David Lichtenstein, and learn from his attitude. A final quote. In 2007, Rabbi Levin spoke about homosexuality and the new theoreticians and the new morality, and he says, this, as long as you don't hurt anyone morality, that's David's morality. As long as you don't hurt anyone, they're doing it. It doesn't stare anyone. He tried to delineate with me, David Lichtenstein. Ashish is you're hurting the husband who becomes also to his wife. But homosexuals, two mishkevei zacha, doing something doesn't hurt anybody. So here's how Norman Lamb responds to David Lichtenstein. As long as you don't hurt anyone, to morality threatens to undermine the whole structure of morality as we know it, and to destroy the family as the fundamental collective unit upon which society is based. The negative rule of not hurting anyone else is bound to become the sole normative criterion for all legal codes in the Western world, like you see from David Lichtenstein. As long as you say two adults doing what they want, they're not hurting anybody. Let them transgender, let them marry, let them adopt children, let them this, let them that, they're not hurting anybody. So Norman Lamb says this is going to be the death knell of Western civilization. Thus, adultery and homosexuality will be legally permitted where both parties consent and are of the age of consent, and no third party is injured thereby. We have to give credit where credit is due. Norman Lamb was YU, Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb. He was YU. He was highly criticized. I remember a famous speech by Rabbi Gifter, I think, and there's plenty to criticize. Nevertheless, Geba Cook, Adrab, it's a kal v'chomer. Even if you can criticize other things, look how stark he was. And then we have the Lichtensteins, and then we have the Rappaports to a less extent, more recent than Lichtenstein, but nevertheless, Rabbi Rappaport's not going in this mahalach. This is really fascinating, and I praise the Jewish press for bringing this to our attention. Let me move forward again. Let me just say that last week I spoke about Lakewood, and I spoke about the fact that there were politicians in Lakewood. I can't mention their names again. I don't have it in front of me. But two politicians, I think state senators or whatnot in New Jersey, representing Lakewood, that voted for all three transgendered bills, advancing the transgender cause at the direct expense of religious family people. It's a tremendous busha. It's an embarrassment. With all the Askonim in Lakewood, with Aaron Kotlers and the Weisberg's Authority and the Rabbi Schenkolewski and the whoever it is, and the ganze Trask and the ganze Taram, there's nobody home when it comes to resolutely informing these politicians representing Lakewood. If you dare to vote for schmutz at this late stage in devolving the culture, you will lose our support. That's what's called for. And if we continue to be quiet, it's a terrible catastrophe. Lakewood, Askonim, Balabatim, wake up and ask your Askonim why these guys were allowed to vote the way they did, and why there's no political price to pay. It's still possible to cause them a political price. The Supreme Court decision that the Baker won. You know, a while back, there was a vote of the population of Maine on a homosexual marriage bill or something like that. And they narrowly, by 4 or 8 points, the moral side won. And Agudish Yisrael was blowing their horns and issuing press statements, hurrah, hooray, hooray, hooray. This is great news, the moral side won. And I said at that time on my radio program, this is absolutely tipshus foolishness that doesn't rise to the level of understanding of a bacher in his middle Mesifta years. Boy Naseh Cheshbon, if they won 52 to 48, that means 48% of the voters voted for schmutz and immorality. They should have been goyzer tainis, and we should be loivis sakva efer and tshuva, because it's so close. We're close to the tipping point. Instead, these shitchiistic, superficial people are issuing haras in press statements. Similarly, whoever doesn't say with a full mouth that the Supreme Court 7-2 victory for the Baker is actually a defeat for moral people, it's not a victory. It's a victory for the Baker because the Tipshim, the idioten who are on the Colorado Civil Rights Board, managed to say such manifestly anti-religious statements that it gave an out for Justice Kennedy and some of the liberal justices to vote against the $130,000 fine and forcing this baker to bake a special cake for a homosexual couple. However, if there wouldn't have been this quote unquote manifest anti-religious expressions, and the homosexuals would go by the letter of the law, and the agencies would go by the letter of the law, who knows if the Supreme Court would have ruled like that court I mentioned to you in liberal California that ruled in favor of pastries, bakeries, and a religious Christian lady that she didn't have to bake a cake for the homosexual couple. In other words, we have to be scared by the narrowness of the scope and the fact that the Supreme Court did not want to take on the broader issue that when religious freedom conflicts with so-called civil rights of homosexuals, which or freedom of speech or whatever you want to call it, which right takes precedence? And we feel that religious values is so intrinsic. That's the most basic. That's our oxygen. Okay. So I want to just inform you of another important issue over here. In the other issue is a bill to ban bris milah reaches the Denmark Parliament. This is page 12 of this week's Hamodia, and it's a large article. I don't have time to access it. I just have time to tell you one thing. If using the lumdus of the Chavetz Chaim and Rabbi Yisrael Salanta saying if a Yid is being Machal Shabbos in Paris, it has to do with us in Vilna or whatever, or the Chavetz Chaim is reputed to have said that if there's an earthquake in China, it has to do with us in Yidden in Europe, or Rav Chatzkel Levenstein, the Panovich Mashgiach, who once came in crying, and they asked him, why is he crying? And he said, because I heard there was a large death toll today in Vietnam. The question is, how does it affect us? So it's really a pasuk in Tzefanya. Ach tiri v'tikri musar. See what's happening and take a musar from that. Learn and apply it to yourself. But no. So why is there an attack in Denmark? How many Jews are there in Denmark? Very few. And the attack on Bris Milah, is it going to pass right now, the Danish parliament? They're predicting it won't pass. But nevertheless, Hashem is sending us a message. In other words, if in Europe, and for that matter worldwide, we cared enough about Kedushas HaBris, this would prevent in that very area that there should be challenges. Meaning the following story. There was a child who was hit in a car on Rivers FDR Drive, right outside on the block of Moshe's apartment building. And they came, and he was laying there in the street. There was a yarmulke a few yards away from him that had ostensibly fallen off. They came to Moshe, and they said, Moshe, you got to stop. You got to say, tell him there's a kid laying there who might be precarious. He might be seriously life-threatening. He was hit by a car, life-threatening illness, whatever. And Moshe was very calm, and he said, Sekenet Zayin. What do you mean, Sekenet Zayin? It can't be Moshe. The kid's laying there. He said, it can't be that that's a Jewish boy. Go check. And they checked, and they found out that he's not a Jewish boy. What had happened? He was riding a bike or something, and he saw a Jewish boy with a yarmulke, and he grabbed his yarmulke, and a few feet later, he got hit by a car. And thus the yarmulke flew out of his hand, and people thought the yarmulke flew off of his head. He was Jewish. Said Rav Moshe in explanation, it can't be that on the same block that I am, that I'm doing so much in Torah and Yerushalayim and pro-Yiddishkeit and pro-Hashem, that a Yiddish child should be hurt in such a profound way, come out within my Dalet Amos. So that's the way it works. You understand, for a Moshe, you get that insight. It can't be in New York City that so many people are doing a positive Bris Milah, and there should be an attack on Metzitza B'Peh. If there is an attack on Metzitza B'Peh, it's because there are chesronis directly relating to Kedushas HaBris and Yesod and Bris Milah. If not, it wouldn't happen. If in Denmark, at the edge of Europe, with a very small Jewish community, there's an attack on Bris Milah, it's because of the greatest stuff that's going on in the European communities, and perhaps in Denmark in particular, with legislation and social movements, that the Orthodox Torah community is not doing enough to fight it or to make the line of demarcation or the distinctions, etc. And that's why Devorah Waxman, who is a primary writer for Jewish news in England, in this week's Jewish Press, again, very important, on page 12, Haredi schools organize against law. Listen to what's going on. A mass meetings took place in the United Kingdom because Orthodox communities are in an effort to get the Haredi public to reply to a Department of Education consultation document that may result, fasten your seatbelts, in the closing of around 60 independent yeshivas. You hear all the right-wing yeshivas might have to close because they won't teach a Mishkav Zachar transgender curriculum. Could you imagine that's happening in the father, so to speak, or the mother of our country, the home of the Magna Carta and certain freedoms in England, our closest ally? You think that this comic attraction can't come to America someday, Rabbi? I think again. Listen to this. Let me give you a quote from Rabbi Yaakov Wershner of Manchester, who has around 20 such schools. He says, many people do not realize the crisis that is really facing the community in Britain. We have been deeply asleep. Listen to his language. Those who refuse to wake up will soon find themselves sleepwalking and in an intractable situation. He is justifying what Rav Avigdor Miller, the Kashavarov, has had me and a handful of activists doing. They would have wanted thousands of Yidden to do it. They would have wanted all of the representatives of Lubavitch, Satmar, Young Israel, RCA, OU, and all the people, the masses, to fight this for the last 40 years. But Aval Hashem Anachnu, we were asleep, and now we're getting a heads up from England. A heads up from England. He said that the previously thought of attitude that Britain is a Malchus Shel Chesed is changing. Quote, the government has indicated that it will no longer tolerate disregarding any part of the syllabus. They have openly stated that this will lead to the closure of many small private schools, and the problem is they want to teach acceptance of homosexuality and transgenderism and the prohibition against teaching creationism. They won't even allow the teaching of creationism. If you don't subscribe and teach evolution and Darwinism in Britain, they'll close your yeshiva down. And then they'll force the kids to go to school because kids below a certain age can't go to school. Rabbi say it's coming here to America. It's coming to New York. It's only a matter of time. I just want to bring to attention very briefly that there's a full page, there's a large article on page 37, A True Jewish Poet Surfaces. The article has my byline. It's an interview with my good friend Reb Moshe Leib, who's a Renaissance man, and it was written a book called Suraf's Touch. It's a book of poetry, very, very sophisticated poetry with deep Torah concepts. It's mamash a gem. I recommend it highly. You can find it in your Sfarim stores, or it's being sold on Amazon, and I recommend it highly to you. Now, Baruch Hashem, in this week's issue of the Jewish Press, page 16, the dispatch from the culture wars, the abortion bill in New York suffered a setback, Baruch Hashem, but only because Simcha Felder was there and only because of because the health committee barely voted against the worst abortion bill ever. And it's possible that they might try to make a maneuver to put it straight out into the Senate, and that would be catastrophic. So we have to daven HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and under the title Mishenichnas June Marbin B'Toyeva, on May 14th, the California Assembly voted for a one-line bill that states the governor shall annually proclaim the month of June as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender Pride Month. It passed without a single no vote and with 9 Republicans voting for it. This is a sign of the times. Moirav Rabbi Sai, this is Yehuda 11, and we are drawing close to the end of the program. I want to appeal to each and every one of you. Why don't you who are listening email Headlines Radio and say to David Lichtenstein not to be a chicken, not to be a baby. Let the public judge the full, unabridged, unadulterated, excuse the pun, unadulterated, full 1 hour and 15-minute debate between me and David Lichtenstein. If he wasn't a chicken and he wasn't afraid that his position, that he was coming out the loser, if he thought he was a winner, he would be happy to provide that tape. Crush Rabbi Lichtenstein, just email him or call his hotline or whatever and say, publish the tape. When Shmuley Batech debated me twice in the Alan Combs program, the first taping, I didn't know how stark he was. He beat me 55-45. So he sells those tapes. But the second taping, where I beat him and he left the program after 2 hours and didn't stay for the third, he doesn't sell those tapes. David Lichtenstein is acting like Shmuley Batech light. Until we meet again, this is Rabbi Yehuda 11 wishing you a good Shabbos, a good Tamid, and keep up the fight and let the people know that this program exists, and let's spread the hashkafa.